this workshop 3, which is continuation of apparently famous workshop 63 from the previous year, on the very, very last workshop of ERF 2025, on quite important topic of Europe's strategy for robotics effectively. I'll give a bit of a background in a second, but this has been organized by quite a big group of people that's been working in the background over the last year as an output of the workshop that happened in Stuttgart. So to let you know how this will look like, this will be a very interactive session, so you won't listen to me for too long. I will provide a little bit of a background and how we want to frame this workshop, and then we'll split ourselves to fairly equal groups across all the tables to discuss some of the questions that we posed to the whole community here. And then at the end of the workshop, a nominated representative from each table will give a maximum 5-minute overview of the key talking points that were discussed by each table. And I'll wrap up with a summary of some future actions and where this can hopefully lead to. But for the bit of an overview, we've been living in quite disruptive times for quite a few years now, from global pandemic in 2020 through number of military conflicts, alliances that are changing, breaking, reshaping, different challenges with supply chain and trade, but also climate change, things like wildfires, floods happening all across the world and all across Europe. So it's quite a challenging time, but robotics been quite a foundational technology or a frontier technology that's been an answer to, or effectively an answer, or technology supporting some of those challenges, or helping us to go through them in some way. And that's happening across whole Europe on national level, I think much more on the European Commission level as well. We'll see where it will lead in FP10 program. There's been a lot happening in this space, as we know, in all modalities of robotics, as an answer or resilience, European resilience to those challenges. But that doesn't come very easily. We are not completely independent. We rely on a lot of technology coming out of different parts of the world, and this goes back to the question about alliances and trade. So there's been a lot of discussion going on since the last year. There's a bit of a timeline and a bit of an overview of what's been going on within the euRobotics. So we had this workshop 63, Robotics for the Changing World, last year, which was a bit of a test if this is a topic that we see as a valuable thing for community, and if this is a valuable topic for the discussion. It was fairly small but very, very active workshop, and it quite quickly triggered a creation of a task force within euRobotics made up from mostly various board of robotics members, topic group coordinators, and people that attended the workshop. And we've been meeting mostly bi-weekly through majority of or through half of the last year. This included some discussions within the topic group summit, if some of you attended it. And during the meeting in Tallinn in December, it resulted in publication of Tallinn statement from the euRobotics, and triggered another set of activities where I would say association is trying to find its best call for influence over Europe. That doesn't mean just European Commission, but this is effectively part of this whole activity, this workshop. So board of directors created 2 strategic working groups focusing on industry and influence. So what euRobotics as community can do better to engage with industry, engage with their needs, and how euRobotics can influence broad community better, which means policy, policymakers, funding, innovation agencies, trade associations, and so on. We just had a topic coordinator meeting where we had quite heated, maybe not heated, but quite interesting discussion about this. And there is quite ambitious goal of continuing those discussions and potentially raising some grand challenges and further actions from euRobotics to be presented at ICRA. So just to recap very quickly, I'll finish talking in a second, but I will ask everybody to split fairly equally by all the tables. I think we're not too far, just trying to have 3 to 6 people across the table. So maybe if you could move over there just to have equal groups, and I would ask David, Franziska, Mahesh, Agata to try to work with each table and lead the discussion. And what the discussion will be about, we have 3 overarching questions and a goal that we would like to reach at the end of this workshop. So 3 quite high-level questions. They're high level on the purpose because everybody's coming from a different background, different perspective, and we want to capture quite broad opinions. So where do you think Europe should concentrate its efforts to regain strategic autonomy in robotics? Is it hardware? Is it dual-use technologies? Is it software? What do you think it is? What are the practical steps that industry and governments can take to secure better supply chain for robotics? And which policy mechanisms or funding mechanisms would most effectively help European robotics companies to innovate, scale, and be competitive globally? So very timely topics. What we would like to get out of this session, out of each table, to gather your thoughts and identify quite clear, actionable areas where euRobotics as association and community can create more influence or better education or inform broad community concentrated around robotics in Europe. So again, both developers and end users of technology, but also policymakers, to make sure that we as association understand where we can, how we can shape the strategy or inform policymakers creating the strategy about the direction that robotics can take to enable productivity, safety, and resilience in Europe. So I'll leave that on the screen. We will have now about 40 minutes for the discussion between each of the groups. And after 40 minutes, I'll let you all know, I'll let you know 5 minutes before the timer goes off to start wrapping up and gathering your output or your thoughts, and we will ask a person each from each table to gather key 3 to 5 bullet points effectively coming out of your discussion. So yeah, that's where we are. Again, I think we have fairly equal split at the tables. So we'll leave that now with 40 minutes for continuing discussion on those topics, and if every table could nominate someone as their spokesperson and a raise hand maybe in 2 or 3 minutes, that would be great, so I can keep track of that. I'm really pleased that discussions are going so well and so far, but we need to start wrapping up and gathering feedback. So yeah, you have about 4 minutes to go through the key things.
Okay. I'm not sure if I'm going to need 4 minutes. Starting in question 1, there was a lot of discussion back and forth on the various challenges that are faced. And there was a kind of discussion around, is this do we have solutions and we're looking for the problems, or are we going to try to identify the problems which actually need robotic solutions? There was the discussion of how much of a supply chain can we take over. So in terms of where should we concentrate our efforts, can we actually manage to concentrate in on one particular application to the point where we have the entire supply chain like China did with solar? And the answer is probably not. So in that case, when and where do we focus in? We looked at things where we've got weaknesses. So in terms of batteries and magnets, we don't actually have some of the materials, or we don't have the production capabilities. So where can we recover and make sure that we are at least not very weak in that one particular point in the supply chain? Back to is it a solution seeking a problem, or do we have genuine strategic problems identified? We sort of looked at the big macro trends, so things like defense, everything's become very volatile, and the aging population, so where can we use robotics for more services? And from the defense perspective, there was the discussion of our dependence on large international systems like GPS, which have been shown to be a bit of a weak point in terms of defense, let's say in Ukraine with the drone warfare. They've developed alternatives there, whether that's the fiber optic cables or, should we be looking at European versions of some of these systems to make us slightly more autonomous, slightly more resilient in terms of if there's a larger scale attack or there's a larger scale conflict, that we have systems that we can depend on that are authenticatable, that are our own. So yes, developing proprietary systems that sort of reduce our dependency, rather than aiming for specific applications if we've not got supply chains and the fabrication facilities, becoming a little bit more autonomous in terms of the systems running them. But it was sort of widely agreed within the group that true autonomy is going to be pretty much impossible. We're too plugged into the wider world. The one area that was brought out as a strength, because we have some good semiconductor expertise on our table, is that we have big companies like ASML, which are global capabilities, and they're centered here, and we still have control over that relatively. So practical steps follow on from that, and that we want to make sure that our supply chains are distributed and that we don't have single points of failure. I think that comes from the talks earlier on today. And maintaining good secondary relationships with places like Australia, Canada, South America, and India are going to be very important, so that we have sort of relationships outside the big blocks, and that we can get some of these ores and minerals and other things. That was as far as we got with practical steps. I'm afraid we started running out of time for the last two questions. And in the third question, we got as far as mentioning subsidies, and then the time bell went. So that's us.
Thank you very much. So, group 2, David, are you the spokesperson?
In fact, it is a common, great minds think alike. So we just start talking about where should we concentrate. We agree motors and sensors are all Chinese dominated, and it's not like China is the enemy, we're just thinking about supply chains. We did come with the idea of semiconductor as well, not just ASML, but we do have some capability, but a lot of our chip manufacturing, NVIDIA, that kind of stuff, which we use a lot in robots, and AI does come from Taiwan, which I'm not hedging my bets at the moment. So we felt there's a need, an area for Europe is we have got the capabilities, putting them together, making it a bit more concentrated and focused. We've probably got about 20 wafer fabs across Europe, particularly in Germany, in Dresden, and in Ireland, and there's some in the UK as well, and definitely in Italy. Italy is one of the crown jewels of semiconductor. So we thought that's something we need. We can build motors, we can build sensors, we should do more of it. We can't do it as cheap as overseas, but it's not about... I'm a professor of sustainability. I hate the word sustainability now. I use the word resilience because it sounds more palatable to companies. If you say we're looking at resilience, they're more interested in hearing that. So for resilience, we need to think about that. We talked about regulations. How do we protect, particularly strategic companies? How do we identify them? So for the UK, for example, I work with a welding company. That company is considered a sovereign asset because they do the defence work, so they're protected. We need to probably identify companies more which we protect. One of our biggest losses in terms of ownership was probably KUKA. You think about the three major robotics manufacturers. Universal is American, ABB is now SoftBank, so it's Japanese, and of course KUKA is Chinese. We've given away three of our crown jewels in robotics. Not the only ones, I'm sure it's more up and coming, but how quickly the government didn't step in and say, hey, we should protect it. And that's a big loss, especially when you come to using in defense applications. A lot of my work is defense related. I'm very conscious about which brands of robots I can use, because no one else is inside there. And that precludes us from choosing certain things. We looked at the idea of benchmarking. And this is something which Karol's quite familiar with. Last year, myself and Karol visited, and a few other colleagues visited Pittsburgh, Boston, Singapore, Odense, and Stuttgart, just to see what other clusters around the world are doing and what can we learn from them. And one of the things, of course, is things like cost of borrowing of money, government support, the whole ecosystem, having champions. There's a lot of things we learned. We can do more of it. I mean, two of those places we visited are in Europe. Why can't we copy and paste it to other parts and help build out this ecosystem? So we thought benchmarking is something we should look at. Interesting about regulations. We said how to protect companies, but the table also said we need less regulations for startups. How to make it easier for startups to get underway. And I think the story is we have 28 sets of regulations. We have 27 countries, and then there's another set of regulations on top, just to make it more fun. And you wonder why we chose Brexit. I didn't. We also talk about the mindset. So we went a bit military here. If you look at Ukraine at the moment, one thing which is outstanding there is the constant innovation. I was told by some ex-defense officers that every 6 weeks, you put a new device, a new weapon into the field, within 6 weeks, you need to have countermeasures being developed. So it's constantly forcing innovation. I'm not saying we should go to war as all our countries, but at the same time, that kind of mindset really is something which is lacking, the need to constantly innovate. Last thing we picked up on was funding. The Americans, the cost of borrowing is very easy. Our team on our table, someone went to ICRA in Atlanta, and they were talking to venture capitalists straight away. I spent 100 million last year. How much money do you need? And that kind of conversation, which you never hear in this part of the world. We never talk about money so freely. So really, do we need to look at ways to promote joint ventures, promote cost of borrowing, get banks. So next year, we've been challenged. We need to bring a major European bank to give a speech at ERF 2027. See, not me, everyone agrees. And talk about things like risk appetite as well, and also trying to encourage to break down the barriers between the two. So that was something which is quite important. He wants us to get rid of the dollar and make the euro the currency of the world. That'll be the yen. The dollar can be third. So the seriousness about that is because it makes it easier to borrow money as well, and it's quite important to have more flow of cash across Europe. So that was our main points. Okay.
Thank you, David. On banks, we already talked to 3 banks about ERF 2027, so that's timely. Mostly UK, but 1 European. Next table, will that be? Yeah. That might be something to put on the to-do list. Next table over there is as Agata.
Sorry, let me find my notes. So we started talking a little bit about when it comes to supply chain, around vulnerabilities and around understanding what vulnerabilities are, whether that's for robotics, electric motors, or whatever you make realistically. And how can you as a business or as a nation, adapt to some of the potential holes that might be where you can only get magnets from China. And for whatever reason, due to geopolitical challenges, for example, that might stop. And what is your backup plan? What do? Do you change the design? Create a totally different motor design or robot design that allows you to maybe use parts that are built in Europe or somewhere closer, somewhere where you might have 2, 3, 4, 5 suppliers that are more local to you. The other interesting conversations we've had that probably works alongside all of this is cybersecurity. So we use a lot of data. Robotics uses a lot of AI that generates data. You need data. Where is it coming from? Who's holding it? Where is your data going? And especially when we'll be talking about defense or dual use, that becomes increasingly more important. We know if you buy kit from China, it can be communicating with China or Russia or wherever it comes from. And especially obviously defense, dual use, that can be a particular challenge for them. We then sort of started talking a little bit about funding and availability and understanding of what funding you as a business might have to innovate and the way the funding comes. So Horizon 2020 is extremely competitive and a lot of it is big programs. But if we're talking about startups, they probably don't need 15 million program that takes 3 months to write a proposal. They want 50K or 100K or something that's going to allow them to do sort of your minimal viable product. Fail fast, see what happens, and then get more funding. A very interesting phrase from one of the colleagues on the table was about zombie startups. I'm going to steal this and use it for the rest of my life, which is startups that continue to get governmental or public funding, but they're not giving you any products. They're just there. They're surviving. They're sort of sleepwalking. They're not looking for VC funding or angel funding. They're just slowly moving, but they're not dying. Compare with US, where it's very much fail fast. You don't get funding. You essentially die. And you move on to something else. You create another startups. And I think that's probably some of the highlights from our group.
Thank you. You stood up very eagerly, Reinhard, so I'll hand over to you. Yeah, I'll go for it.
Motivate the community here to be a bit more agile, meaning turning around in this direction. So a lot of the discussion here, what is needed? So we focused not really on the questions. It was a floating discussion across the questions to a certain extent. We try to identify what is needed. What do we need? Do we have supply chains? And one of the statements was that if we have enough suppliers worldwide, then this might be good enough. We don't need to have everything only within Europe so that we are resilient. But of course, the capability to produce things would be good enough. And also we discussed the difference, whether it's just standard components or special hardware to be built and designed, which could make a difference here. So, but in principle, the hardware might be available. The question is, what is there? Is it more on the hardware side, or is also the supply chain with the computing, with the cloud available in a certain quality level from the EU? And one of the good examples that was mentioned was GitHub. Everyone programming uses GitHub nowadays. There does not seem to be any replacement, and if someone decides to switch off GitHub, the community has a problem. This would be something where we might need to have a second supplier and things like that. But also, it's not about whether we can produce, but also whether we can scale it, whether we can really produce things at scale if needed. So this was trying to address this first question to a certain extent here. And what can we do about or beyond actual demand? So ensuring that SMEs actually want robots, not that they are aware, there is a certain technology, but it looks like being more for the big corporates to include this, and really going to the brownfield and seeing that this implementation of robotics technology in the brownfield might be a problem. And the question is not that they are not really willing to accept robots in their company, but what is the actual problem behind? And a couple of ideas was here, is it too hard to implement, or whatever other reason might be there? And of course we brought up again the good old word of the market failure that was discussed also with Bernd and others remember for quite some time within euRobotics, and also with the Commission, that we need to find a way to address those market failures and see what's going on. In principle, if you have unlimited money, ask an integrator to do something, then you would get any solution after a while. But the question is what you can do to do it very quickly. What would be the benefit for an SME? What is the investment versus the return on investment? And what do they gain? And also in the comparison between themselves, so just immediate competitors. And so this seems to be an issue, and the overall situation seems to be that there is no single cause of problem, but there is quite a set of things to be covered. I don't know whether someone else from the table wants to add on this here for this particular part. Then let's switch for the second question. So then the first two questions we try to solve or to discuss with this one. The third question about policy or funding mechanisms looked like that we still need to pick up the word of the market failure again and see how to solve it. And one of the most interesting comments was here that we first need to understand, and in some cases it seems not to be the case that people really understand what the problems are. So understanding here means not having a demo, not having a prototype, being aware of the time needed for actual hardware development, especially when it's robust enough to be brought into practice for a really 24/7 operation. And sometimes also the money might be there, but the quick results are simply not possible, because a proper solid development which runs then in a real world application is something different than coming here. Even if it's very nice to have our exhibition, most of the things we can see here are prototypes, which is good from the research point of view, but putting it into an SME and saying, okay, your cost level, now you have the initial cost, you have some maintenance operation cost, but you don't need to call an engineer every 3 weeks for a horrendous amount of money to get the problem solved, which we didn't anticipate in the beginning. That might make a difference here. So this means the analysis of the problem, the design, and better to understand, and then also having a solution which is able to scale. This is something. Then it's also we discussed what kind of funding mechanism, and we know in the past there was always also the attempt to give money to SMEs to be involved in the robotics thing. We had enough projects around, and many people here in the room would remember this. But very often, after nice projects like SME Robot or others, the SME said, oh, thanks for the prototype, now I put it in the corner because it's not really useful. It was a very good experience. We loved it, but without the researcher standing next to me, it will not run 24/7. And these kind of failures need to be avoided. But still, no one has a real good answer on the how. And one thing is about speed, the other thing is about mindset, especially when you come to the brownfield, and sometimes also when you look at the typical funding mechanism, the funding agencies expect an answer within a week, and they themselves answer within 3 months. This is something which is not very helpful.
Thank you, Reinhard. And the last but very much not least is this here, Sanford.
Heck, I'm going to do it this way. All right. Everything they said. Now, that's the quick one. I'm going to say a couple other things and answer the questions, okay? we all had a very interesting discussion. We were basically doing what we do. Europeans talk about everything. We are this incredibly smart group. By the way, I am an American, okay, who's lived in Europe for 26 years. So I apologize for the accent. But Europe does not mainly have an invention problem in robotics. It has a commercialization, coordination, and a demand formation problem. The EU is already moving toward resilience, industrial strategy, and reduced dependencies, but robotics will only become a strategic autonomy in practice if someone forces the link between policy language and actual deployed systems. So let's talk about the three questions. The answer to this, where should Europe focus to regain autonomy? We should be focusing on the control points in the robotic stacks, not just the end products. We're systems engineers, yes? You have to look at the points to understand how to win. We need to control the right points, not just everything, but the ones that matter the most. Give you some specific ones. Actuators and precision motion. Right now we're stuck with Asia. Power electronics and battery systems. We got another dependency risk. Machine vision and edge AI compute. Industrial software layer, it's the highest leverage. And system integration capability, it's our hidden weakness. Autonomy doesn't come from building robots. It comes from controlling the parts nobody can replace. That's how we regain strategic autonomy. 2, how are we going to build a strategic, resilient, Europe-based supply chain? Stop thinking supply chain. It's a deployment chain. Does that make sense? You like that? Okay. I was like, I don't know if you're doing the face just because I'm doing the right words. Okay. 3 concrete moves. Dual source everything critical. Stop relying on one country. Build EU and aligned partner redundancy. I think someone else talked about Australia and such, yeah? Canada too. I like, hey, big fan. Okay. Fund integrators, not just innovators. Europe has prototypes but lack people who deploy at scale. What are we going to do about that? Certify integrator networks across regions. Let's start making what the US would call, the engineers, the Corps of Engineers. Where's the European Corps of Engineers? Where's our team that does this right? Tie supply to guaranteed demand. Public procurement for factories, logistic hubs, hospitals. Make the first 100 deployments matter more than 1,000 pilots. Resilience isn't where parts come from. It's how fast you replace and redeploy them. Yes? By the way, does this sound weird that I'm saying it? Should it be in English? Why? Why is it weird?
Because you're really still American, aren't you?
Well, I am an American. No, I am an American because I'll give you a line that I've been having told to me over and over again. I lived in the U.S. I lived here 26 years, and I've been lecturing in AI and STEM in China for 11 years. The difference between the three, love this line. U.S. gets on by hype because, hang on, we lead in ideas, China leads in deployment, Europe leads in standards. Okay, you're really good. We got to push robotics out of research and ethics and start into industrial capacity and sovereignty. Talk about it in a different frame. We are not just researchers. It turns out this group is 60% research and 40% industry, but we're all citizens. Sorry, I am an American at times. Hang on, one more thing. Let me get the rest. What policy or funding might actually work? Grants do not scale companies, right? Scale industries. Demand does. He brought up the fact that we keep getting 3-year contracts and then suddenly, whoops, we do the prototype, done, you really did a great job, great, I can move on to my new job, and no. We have to pre-commit procurement. Governments commit to buying X units if performance is met. It de-risks scales for companies. Heck, there was a West Wing thing that had literally an Intel guy that had to commit to delivering, and the U.S. would back the money. Can't we do the same? Scale capital and not just venture capital. Late-stage funding to build factories, not just prototypes. Europe dies in the grass between Series A and industrialization. We love making new products. It looks really good. And then we go, look, we did it, and then get running off to the U.S. Stop. Regulatory fast lanes for priority sectors. Someone else mentioned it earlier. Pre-approved certification pathways, especially for healthcare, infrastructure, energy, and defense-adjacent systems. Europe doesn't have an innovation problem. It has a customer problem. That's where the market is, right? The U.S. funds future with belief, China builds it with coordination, and Europe needs to deploy it with intent. Our biggest risk is confusing sovereignty with localization. We don't need everything made in Europe. We need nothing critical that can be turned off from outside Europe to be in Europe. Does that make sense? I hope that helped.
Thank you so much. And on this very positive note, that takes us to the end of the workshop, but I'm really glad that there was a lot of similarities across the table, across all the tables. It seems like we know what we're talking about. I guess what's the next action. In terms of next action, we will continue those activities and discussions through our workshop 63/task force channel on the portal. So feel free to scan the QR code. I will try to create a write-up of this session as soon as possible and make it available for everyone. I think it was very, very insightful and valuable. And before we finish, we have Claire here, who hosts excellent Robot Talk podcast. She is looking for volunteers who are very keen to share some insights from the discussion that we just had. So there is a room available to do some very short interviews with Claire upstairs, I believe. So if anyone's keen, would like to share their thoughts, please come to Claire after we finish in 10 seconds. But yeah, thank you very much for all the input. I listened to discussions around. Obviously, your feedback's been very, very valuable and very insightful. And hopefully this will lead into some meaningful changes and association making more influence across our landscape. Thank you very much.